This week on London Real, we have Derek Laud, former speechwriter and advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and John Major.
Everybody is an immigrant. It's just a question of how far back in time you go. And I got more votes in the Big Brother contest than the British cabinet got votes at the last general election. I find myself feeling more distant than I ever have from the Conservative Party. This is the greatest threat, the new age of media.
London Real presents Derek Laud, The Problem with Immigrants.
But I think that you've got to know something about the past in order to try and build the future.
London Real Academy. Build the best you.
When I go in and look at a person or a business, I want to hear him talk about his dreams.
Am I living in alignment to the way I want to be living? And there's a feeling you get if you're not.
A community of action-oriented people that will keep you accountable to your goals. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. This week on London Real, we have Derek Laud, who was a conservative speechwriter for Prime Ministers Margaret Thatcher and John Major. He has a book called The Problem with Immigrants. He was on Big Brother back in 2005, pre-YouTube, almost won the show, was locked up there for 3 months. He was also the very first Black master of the fox hunt here in Britain. He has extraordinary points of view. He reminded me of British history and politics in a way I really hadn't thought of. And he was highly recommended by British boxer Chris Eubank, their best of buddies. He told me he's the only man who can punch Chris Eubank and get away with it. He's very charming and very fascinating. So I think you're really going to enjoy the time I spent with Derek. If you are not a member of the London Real Academy, well, I don't know, where have you been? What are you doing? The Academy, if you don't know about it yet, is the place where hardcore London Reelers gather to become accountable and take action with their lives. We don't play around. We meet here at the studio every 2 weeks and at places all around the world, and we get each other to really get those goals done and really achieve the things that we want to in our life. We have accountability buddies, we have a community, we have meetups, we've got premium content, success secrets, you get access to our Dan Pena event live at the Ritz, and so many other things. We have a social network, and it's absolutely incredible. You can watch episodes live. I could go on and on, but if you want to know more about it, just click on the Academy on any of the premium content, and you can learn about it. You can learn how you can join for 30 days risk-free. So there's no reason not to come in now. Send me a private message, and let's get your journey started. I would love for you to be a part of it. I'm so proud of this Academy. I'm so proud of the members and what everyone's accomplished, and it's probably one of the greatest things I've done in my life. So please come check that out. You can also see the success secrets for Derek Laud there as well. And now I will leave you with the man himself. We talk about politics, immigration, and all things British. Enjoy. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Derek Laud, who is a former speechwriter and advisor to Conservative members of Parliament, including the Prime Ministers John Major and Margaret Thatcher. You write for The Independent and The Mail on Sunday, and are author of the book The Problem with Immigrants. In 2005, you were a contestant on the television show Big Brother and almost won. And on top of all that, you were the first Black master of foxhounds in the UK. Welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much.
It's nice having you here. Our former guest, Chris Eubanks, the world title boxer and fascinating man that he is, he called me on the phone and he said, Brian, you must have this man on your show. He is the most eloquently spoken black man I've ever met. And I almost dropped my phone. And I said, well, you know, if Chris said that, we should probably have you on. So thank you for coming.
Not a bit, not a bit.
You have one of the most fascinating CVs I've ever seen. You've done so many different things with your life. I don't really know where to start. You aren't an immigrant yourself because you were born here, but your parents were from Jamaica, right?
Correct, yes.
Similar to Chris's, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So we have that in common. That's probably about all that we have in common. But I like him and I've known him for a very, very long time.
How did you meet Chris and how did your relationship start?
Well, indeed, it's a very good question because he was, I think, traveling on a flight back from the United States, I think New York, and he sat next to a man called Sir John Beckwith. John Beckwith is more famous for having a socialite niece called Tamara Beckwith, but in fact he's a very distinguished businessman, British businessman, and he sold his company in 1990, London and Edinburgh Trust, which was a property company, for £520 million cash in 1990, and he set up then a company called Pacific Investments, which was a vehicle to invest his own family money. And it was primarily concerned with private equity finance. And I was working for John.
Okay,
and,
so he introduced you to...
So Chris came to the office for a meeting with John on the back of having sat next to him on the flight back home to London. And John asked me to be present at that meeting. So that's how we met, and we remained friends for a very, very long time.
You're very different people.
Yes.
You were in politics, he was in boxing.
And I don't like boxing and he doesn't like politics. So we couldn't get more different.
You told me earlier that you're the only man who can get away with punching Chris Eubank.
Oh yes, and I've done it several times, you know, and he's amazingly gentle. And it's something else that I learnt not just from Chris, but also from Lennox Lewis, that I also know, another Jamaican, another great man. And he is a gentle giant. And what they both taught me, which was something I hadn't thought of before, is that they can kill with one punch. And that therefore means that they have to be exceptionally disciplined people, and they can never lose their temper. I mean, I lose my temper at a drop of a hat, and it has no consequences really, apart from me shouting a bit. But if they did, just think what the consequences of
yes,
that
and
might
Chris
be.
talked about that on the show, and as far as how you have to, you know, a man who has these skills has to be careful not to use them, because you're so much more powerful than the people around you. And so he said that takes, you know, tremendous, you know, responsibility when you're built like that.
So when I'm punching him and doing all this, he's just so calm. He doesn't do anything. It's water off a duck's back, you know, just smiles. And
you know, we had an amazing 2-3 hours I spoke here with Chris, and he must have recited 12 pieces of prose from heart.
Yes.
First, I didn't know he was reciting prose, and then once I realized he was, I was listening. But I had a coffee with him at the Dorchester. I'm sure you've had coffees with him at the Dorchester. He loves it there.
That place.
And he had like a quadruple espresso, and I was meeting him to talk about something else, and he said, Brian, I watched one of your videos, and you were swearing. And he said, you do not need to swear. And he went off for 20 minutes about how a man cannot buy respect. A man cannot buy honor. A man cannot. And I don't swear anymore on camera. But enough about Chris. Can you take me back to politics in the 90s? Because I got to this country, funny enough, I think it was the day Tony Blair was elected, which I think was July 5th, 1997. I arrived here to work. And so a lot of us don't remember the politics before that. They don't remember the John Major days and the Thatcher times. And but you were there, and I just wondered how you got there, what it was like back then. Do you yearn for the old days, or how much different is it now? It feels like the days of the polished media politician where kind of Clinton and Blair took a note from that, or is that just my simplistic way of looking at it?
No, I don't think it is simplistic, and I think it's not a bad analysis either. But what I would also say is that there are people in their 20s and 30s in this country that won't remember what Britain was like in the mid-1970s. I remember the 3-day week. I remember the lights going out. I remember having supper by candlelight, not because I was a romantic, it was just because of necessity, because there was industrial strife in Britain. And
still from the war years, the economy hadn't recovered, or just?
No, it was because we were a unionized, corporatist economy. So nothing could happen in Britain in those days without trade union cooperation, without trade union consent. It was almost as if the elected government had no power apart from that was conferred upon them by the trade unions. And bargaining over conditions necessary, I'm sure, to advance progress, bargaining over wages, always desirable to want more money to do what you do and probably do very well, was very prevalent in Britain in the 70s and the 1980s. And before the 1979 general election, the Labour Prime Minister was a man called James Callaghan, and he came back from a Commonwealth summit in the Bahamas, looking sun-kissed, whilst people were not being buried in England, and the dustbins were not being emptied because there were strikes. You know, Britain today is a very, very different place, which many people that live, work and vote in this country that are in their 20s, in their 30s, or early 40s will have no recollection of and very little appreciation of what needed to change in Britain to make it what it is today.
Okay, was it socialist back then?
Well, I mean, the post-war Britain, of course, was a period of great social change, because it was when natural deference started to change, when people were preferred, rightly so, based on merit, not on class.
Okay. Preferred deference, is that what you said? So
yes.
less royal and historical roles and more.
Well, this whole notion of deference was a nation that actually just responded to being told what they will do without questioning it, conferring authority on someone based on class, not achievement. Those are the type of things closely associated with the notion
I
of
get my
deference.
history lessons from Downton Abbey, like most Americans.
I've never watched it.
Okay, well, it's fascinating. The last season or two, you see the people downstairs starting to question kind of their roles and if they can do other things. And, you know, you can see the Labour government kind of coming through, and it's kind of like in the 30s. And there's this underlying idea of this class-based society starting to ask questions about why. You know? And so I can see kind of, you know, what you're talking about. Is it important to know our history, to know where we're going and what's even happening today?
Well, I think that you've got to know something about the past in order to try and build the future. And try and, in as much as history can make this possible, try not to repeat past mistakes. So certainly I think a grounding in history must help almost anyone, regardless of what job you do or or what your interests might be.
Right. Now, you have a conservative view. A lot of people would look back, when Margaret Thatcher died, there were people in the North that, I've never heard anyone celebrating the death of a British leader so much. She was hated for breaking these unions and for the trade groups and for the way I guess it used to be. Whereas you're saying those were times that weren't good for the country, that we needed to get over those practices.
That, by the way, was probably one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen, and probably most of those people that were demonstrating in the streets or celebrating the death of Margaret Thatcher never knew her, were probably not even alive when she was first elected leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister in 1979, and have based their views on prejudice and not on fact. The one thing I would also say, and I think that this is what makes me most troubled about it, is and it's something that should concern us all, is that I suspect people will behave in exactly the same way when Tony Blair eventually dies. This lack of deference is something that I certainly understand needed to come about, of natural deference, but that doesn't necessarily mean, in fact it doesn't mean, I take back the word necessarily, it doesn't mean that you should not give respect to people. And after all, neither Tony Blair or Mrs. Thatcher were dictators. They were democratically elected. Democratically elected on three occasions, surpassing the record of Lord Liverpool, in Mrs. Thatcher's case. It is, without doubt, a marvellous place to be, Britain, or anywhere else that is free and democratic. And it's wonderful that people can shout and protest and oppose. But I don't think that you do that based on prejudice. We all know what happens when prejudices advance. That's what the Second World War was about.
What do you remember about Margaret Thatcher?
I think I probably remember most about her the things that were not commonly associated with her, and that was just a sense of enormous kindness to others, and a compassion that would never be seen by the screens of the nation. I mean, I remember this one particular story told to me by Michael Colvin, for whom I worked, who had a daughter who worked for Margaret Thatcher in opposition. So this shows you that the way in which she was behaving then was something that was just, as it were, natural, empirical. She had a terrible week. Most weeks, I think, for the leader of the opposition in politics is pretty terrible. And she'd been overseas and came back, and there was a crisis of some kind brewing. Mrs. Thatcher wasn't interested in the crisis. She'd remembered that Amanda, her diary secretary, had gone into hospital to have a baby, and her first thought was about Amanda and the baby, and she went straight to the hospital. I mean, I think that shows to me something that wasn't commonly associated with her.
Did you see the movie about her?
I did.
What
And
was that like to watch, and did you think there were accurate parts
Well, I
of that?
remember too. I mean, I remember. Just before I went to go, I said to Leon Britton, who served as Home Secretary under Margaret Thatcher, as Secretary of State for Trade and Industry under Margaret Thatcher, and as Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Margaret Thatcher. So his entire political career was made by one woman. And I said to Leon, I'm going to go and see the film. And he said, "Oh, why on earth would you want to go and do that? We've all lived through it." And I thought to myself, that could mean that he'd had enough of her and didn't want to revisit the Thatcher Downing Street years. Or it could have meant that he thought no film could do justice to Mrs. Thatcher. I will leave it in the balance as to what his intentions might have been in that remark. But I came away from having seen it thinking what a terrible depiction of Mrs. Thatcher and her period in office, how trivial it was.
It's a movie.
And it is, but I mean, I think that this is where, going back to your earlier question about history, it has a duty, first of all, to be historically accurate. And it was, in many cases, wanting in that respect. So, for example, I mean, to open the movie with Mrs. Thatcher in a corner shop buying milk and a newspaper was just so far removed from reality.
Right. So the dementia and the Alzheimer's theme, you didn't think was a great way of remembering those periods. That makes sense.
Absurd.
Let me ask you, what is the son of Jamaican immigrants, a black man, doing writing speeches for the Conservative Party of Britain for people like Thatcher and John Major? Is that, or is that a silly question for me to ask? Is that not a strange path for someone to take, or is that a
question I keep asking myself?
How did you get there?
Years later, I think everything happens. I mean, or certainly it has for me. By accident. I've never applied for a job in my life. I've always been invited to do things. And when I was much younger, I thought that I would be a lawyer if I was clever enough, but I wasn't, because I didn't become one. But what I did do was I went to a firm of solicitors and did some work experience, which was arranged by a teacher who was at Oxford with the partner of the firm that I went to work for, and I really had a very good time working there. But it was through that conduit that I met a man called Sir Ian Percival, who was a QC and a Member of Parliament, Conservative Member of Parliament, who then became Solicitor General under Margaret Thatcher. And through Ian, I met a group of other Members of Parliament and ministers and so on and so forth. And I was offered a job in the House of Commons. I mean, I couldn't believe my luck.
What? They must like you.
No, I think most people don't, in fact.
Don't like you.
Yes, don't like me, yes.
Even though, but the Big Brother people liked you.
Well, the Big Brother people certainly did. I mean, I got more votes in the Big Brother contest than the British Cabinet got votes at the last general election. So
why do they think they liked you? Did they see something they could identify with? You were very real on that show? You were very open on that show?
Well, I suspect when you were... I mean, I was there for nearly 3 months, so they had a long long how do you do. When I came out of that programme, David Cameron telephoned. I've known him for a very long time. And the Conservative Party chairman asked me to go in to talk to them about this, because they were so surprised that I was so successful. And they wanted to see if there was something that the Conservative Party could learn from this experience and use that experience to somehow get an upside, as we say in finance. And I told them I didn't think it was going to be possible, not least because most of them were fickle. Secondly, it seemed to me that most people responded to anybody because of authenticity. And what most politicians lack is authenticity.
Okay. So they could have learned that from you. That it was the
yes, but I can't give them authenticity.
Right, okay. I told someone that you were on Celebrity Big Brother, and then I checked, and they were like, they checked on you, and they said, no, he was with the riffraff. He was on Big Brother.
Right.
Which means these people don't have personalities to protect or anything. You're just in with these people who can really behave as they like with no consequences. Is it easier being on Celebrity Big Brother? Do you think it would have been easier for you?
Well, one thing I didn't. I suppose a good moment to answer another question that you haven't asked first. Why did I do it? Well, I did it in 2005 because the Conservative Party just lost the third general election.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, what it is about them that why do they keep losing these elections? Is it conservative thought, ideas, ideology, or might it be the people? So I thought to myself, I'll put myself into the middle of a reality TV contest, which is, if you like a national debating competition.
24 hours a day.
24 hours a day, and just to see how far I could.
Okay, so because of that loss, you figured it's time to run an experiment, a social experiment.
That's right.
Put yourself in the middle of it. For people that don't know, and there are a few people out there who don't know Celebrity Big Brother, can you explain the process? This is also pre-YouTube, so this is a time where, putting yourself out there on video like that just hadn't really been done. So how did you get this opportunity, and what's the whole setup? Is it 3 or 4 months and someone wins, someone loses?
Yes. Well, you see, I'm not an expert on Big Brother. I'd never watched it before I appeared on it, apart from a few weeks of the Celebrity Big Brother version. What happened was I was in the bath and I was reading The Economist, and The Economist was fascinated about the idea of grouping in a house people of extraordinarily different backgrounds, interests, beliefs or non-beliefs, and having more or less no rules, and seeing what happened. And at the end of the Economist article, a light came on in my head that this could be a way of connecting more people to ideas than to celebrity, which is one of the reasons I wouldn't have done a Celebrity Big Brother.
Okay.
Because I think that the whole notion of calling yourself such a thing is absurd in the first place, and secondly, they are paid. We are not.
Okay.
There's a big difference. People's motivation when they're being paid large checks to do things,
then they'll act.
They'll act.
Okay.
They'll, do whatever is necessary.
How do you put yourself under 24-hour scrutiny for 3 months? I mean, is it the first few days, are you conscious of it, and then do you just have to let it go? Were you ever thinking, what the heck am I doing, like when you were in there? And how did you come to that decision to go for it?
Well, I mean, it's a long process getting into the house, and the auditions seem to be never ending. In my case, I just simply said I wasn't going to go do any more auditions. I did 2 or 3 or something like that, and then they telephoned and said, would I go back to it? I said, I'm not going to anymore. So I'd be easier to become Queen of England than to get into this Big Brother house. I said, I'm not interested in doing any more auditions.
And you had a profile in the Conservative Party, so they thought there's value here, he's unique.
Well, I don't know what they thought, but if you read the book that came out after that, it says that from the moment that they met me, they'd made their decision. So going through all the rigmarole of auditions needn't have applied to me, but I suppose that the thing about rules is that they apply to everyone.
And what was it like being in there?
It was extremely tough. I think it's probably the toughest thing I've ever done in my life, because you're in there with people, in my case, a great deal younger, and with very different interests. It's a shocking admission, but I had not heard of Beyoncé until I went into the Big Brother house, but I knew about her when I arrived there. It's shocking, but I'd never heard of Davina McCall before I went into the Big Brother house, but I heard about her there. And one of the things that was really striking to me was to learn about the things that they thought to be important. And I didn't say to them that these things were not important, but they certainly weren't important to me. And they're certainly not the values that I would inculcate amongst any others that I know. But then you see, I think the most wonderful thing about being young is that you should be exactly that. And it's a wonderful thing to witness. But the distance in age was quite significant, I think. I would have been at least 15 years older than most of them.
Okay. And you almost won it.
Although, of course, I looked younger than all of them.
You almost won it. You obviously wanted to win it. How was that feeling at the end? How did you feel when that happened, the interview afterwards and then weeks afterwards?
Well, I mean, there are 2 ways of looking at it. The first is that I won it because I showed that by being authentic, and at that time, and I think it's still very much the case today, that the Conservative Party still have not won a general election since 1997.
Okay, outright won.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
24% share of the vote is what they got at the last general election.
Right, okay.
That's not a victory.
Okay.
They were put in to government in 2010 by an arrangement with the Liberal Party. That isn't a victory. I think that there is something very significant going on in Britain today which nobody is addressing properly. And that is that, roughly speaking, I think we are becoming less of a conservative nation than we were, let's say, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But that doesn't mean to say that the values of conservatism does not exist. It means, however, that the people that are practicing it, the vast majority of people still do not like. So what has again changed in my lifetime, or in my over 30 years active participation in British politics, is that the Conservative Party, when I became a member, was led by a prime minister that was authentically meritocratic.
Thatcher.
Mrs. Thatcher,
Right,
that's
okay.
right. The Conservative Party is now dominated by privilege. So we've gone backwards.
Okay.
And I wonder whether that's a problem for most people. So this is the point that I'm making. So it's not that people are less conservative, I don't think, today in a way of thinking. But I think that they relate less and less to the people that are running the Conservative Party.
Do you think Cameron could use a dose of authenticity or reality? Do you think if he spent 3 months on a Big Brother show, he might see what you saw, which is the people want to see someone that's real, as we say here on this show?
Well, he's a very good man. He's a very nice man. I have my differences with him. I only told them that yesterday in a text message. My differences are real. I find myself feeling more distant than I ever have from the Conservative Party.
Why is
I've
that?
become, over the years, and I think I probably always have been a proper liberal. I'm terribly worried about the idea of scrapping the Human Rights Act. I'm terribly disturbed by giving more powers to the security services. I'm very worried about the way in which the police behave in this country without any accountability. I'm troubled that it doesn't seem to matter that this notion of liberty, which you would think is the preeminent job of a member of parliament to protect, it doesn't seem to me to be at the heart, at the root of its purpose, of its function. I cannot really, in all seriousness, support the diminution of liberty. And I think that some of these things are happening under the Conservative Party.
Okay. When are you going to run for office?
Oh, I wouldn't waste my time. And I certainly, if I did, wouldn't stand any longer for the Conservative Party. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. The thing that struck me most about the coalition, and it should have occurred to more people than it seems to have done, is that the Liberal Party were actually able to govern in a non-conflicted way. So why were they able to so quickly change their policy, for example, on tuition fees? It was because they were non-conflicted. Why was it very difficult for the Conservative Party to properly say to the banks that you have to, and you have to now, separate your retail operation from the rest of it? It was because they're conflicted, because they're too much in the pocket of big business.
Okay.
And I thought that that was such a refreshing thing, that the papers, which are so sleepy in Britain today, which is why nobody bothers reading them, this is the sort of thing that they should be writing about, not how many pints of beer William Hague might or might not have had.
Right. Let me ask you about the press, because and people will watch this for many months to come. But right now, it's the pig gate, and it's, I think, the publisher of your book, someone published something that may or may not have happened to Cameron when he was a student at Oxford, and now people are talking about it. He's not denying it, and the press is talking about something that obviously doesn't have a lot to do with some of the freedoms you're talking about. When you see something like that, and you've been behind the scenes and written the speeches, what's your reaction?
Well, I think probably quite a lot of people in this country today wish they were the pig.
What does that mean?
I mean, he's not an unattractive man, is he, Mr. Cameron?
I like David Cameron.
But this is something that really Cameron himself should use to reinforce authenticity. And the way in which, of course, you do that is to say that everybody's entitled to a past, and I'm no different. But that doesn't mean that I have to sing about that past. That is a broken record.
Right.
I'm no longer listening to vinyl records.
Right. This is the perfect press statement.
I am an iPod man. We all go through change, and I think that it's a great thing. Whether or not the stories are true is irrelevant, but I think it's a wonderful thing that people have had a past and made mistakes and so on and so forth. It would have been so nice, I think, had one felt that Tony Blair had made mistakes before he became a member of Parliament, before he became Prime Minister, instead of making them whilst he is Prime Minister. So I think I would prefer things that way round.
Okay, so they could have addressed it differently as opposed to, no comment, we're not going to justify this book. There could be something as in, things happened in the past, we all have pasts, let's move on.
Well, I think that their response, I think they were almost, there was almost no other response to we're not we're not going to dignify this book by giving comments on it. Was obviously a very good response, because nobody is talking about it today on the news on the news today, radio or television. It's not been mentioned. I looked at The Guardian. There's a small bit on it in the papers. Cameron's approach to this has worked, and also the thing that's really, really pretty pathetic about the book. And they did come to me to ask me to be interviewed for it, is that all of it's hearsay. They're not identifying anybody that saw these things, prepared to say that they saw these things, have got photographic evidence of it, or anything else. It's just all regurgitated vomit. And speaking for myself, I don't like to eat my own vomit.
Right. Okay, well said. Just want to finish up with Big Brother, and then I want to talk about your book. What was it like to do that for 3 months? Would winning changed your life? Would it make you feel better about the whole experience? Are you a competitive person?
Very competitive. I play tennis. I live and breathe it every day. There's not a moment that I don't go over in my head when I fail to win a match, and why perhaps I failed to win it, or a point that I played well, and why did I play it well. And I don't know that I would necessarily have won it. You see, when you're in the house, you've no idea what's going on outside of it. That's the whole thing.
So you don't know how they're editing it or who's seen it.
No, so I couldn't have felt any disappointment as such, because I didn't know I was advancing that well. I did not know that somebody paid for a helicopter to go around the Big Brother house, which is why we were constantly called into inside the house and the shutters closed, with a banner saying Derek Laud for Prime Minister. So I had no way of knowing. I think had I known that, I think the disappointment would have been real.
Okay.
But I certainly would have felt more comfortable in any event with Eugene winning, because he was a much better person than anybody else in the house, and certainly a much better person than me.
If you had won, would it have changed your life differently?
Oh, how could it have done?
Okay. And when you got out of there, how did it change your life, being in that experience?
Well, what I realised was that I didn't want recognition, and I didn't want all the intrusion. I didn't want photographers outside of my house, and I didn't want to be snapped cycling on my bike. And I,
which happened for a year after.
yes, and I didn't want people to know who I'd kissed or not kissed, or it seemed to me to be a bit unreal, rather like being in Capri, where I've just come from today. And I'm grateful for the experience, because I'm absolutely sure in my own mind that the way I want to contribute and be remembered is not through appearing on programs, but perhaps, you know, the things that I've written and the interviews I've given and my ideas and me with all my faults. Those are the things that matter.
It's fascinating to hear you say that, because a lot of people want to be famous. A lot of people want to be recognized. And but some people realize that if you get to be famous or recognized for the wrong reason, it can be mentally taxing for you. You know, I think this happens with actors sometimes, is they'll get stopped on the street and somebody like, oh yeah, you were in that movie. Correct. And the actor's thinking to himself, you know what, I was in that movie for a minute. It was written by someone else, directed by someone else. I'm not the character, and yet they're celebrated for that, as opposed to, say, a book they wrote or something they did where people come up to them and say, that point of view changed my life. I think there's so many different kinds of celebrity, and until you get a little recognition, it's hard to know there's a big difference, you know,
I think that's right,
between something like that. Your book is called The Problem with Immigrants, which I love that title because it makes me want to know more. And this is honestly a great time to have you on, because, again, back to the media, it's been of late the flavor of the week to talk about immigrants. And it's actually been funny for me to watch this media cycle, because it's been kind of up and down, and I don't know if we're going to be talking about the same immigration issues as far as Syria in the next 3 months. I'm an immigrant in this country. Your parents were immigrants. Neither of us look or sound British per se. You sound British. And I think there's something beautiful about what I call the immigrant mind. I think when you come to a country you don't belong at, you have no plan B. You're willing to do things you wouldn't normally do. You're willing to take jobs you wouldn't do to make things happen. And I actually love being an immigrant in this country. It can be very empowering. But at the same time, we see recently what's happening, where hundreds of thousands of people are coming from Syria. They're trying to go to Germany via Hungary. They're trying to come here. London's one of the biggest melting pots in the world, I think, as far as a city, and where it's okay to not be British in this city. Whereas I find New York City, the cab driver from Nigeria is American, and yet here the cab driver from Nigeria is Nigerian, and I find that very refreshing about this city. But can you tell me what your immigrant experience is like, or of your parents, and why write the book? To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to LondonRealAcademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media, log in and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at LondonRealAcademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.